government's high recurrent expenditure compared to what it has budgeted for capital projects for 2012. That's talking about the proposed 2012 budget. Now, there have been several suggestions, and many analysts have preferred solutions as to how the federal government can bring down the cost of running government. And yesterday, I had on Business Morning an economist, Dr. Abiodun Adedipe, and he was talking on how the federal government can go about doing that. We'll play that interview for you so that we can have my guest here, Gabriel Idahosa, give us his own perspective as to how the federal government can take some steps to bring down the cost of running government.
We looked at countries that had been in the kind of problem we are in Nigeria today, and we said, how did they get out of this problem? What economists call the Dutch disease. The Dutch disease says, look, you are resource rich and resource dependent to start with, and from that resource you generate a lot of revenue, and when you have a windfall, you blow it. And when suddenly there is a crash in the price, you become reasonable in your expenditure. That's the Dutch disease, simply explained. So we said, countries that had experienced this in the past, what did they do? So now what the committee recommended to the federal government was simply this. Now, let's compare recurrent expenditure with our non-oil revenue. But that was what those countries did.
That's agricultural sector.
They matched those two. Okay? Non-oil revenue is only this much. So, and what we found was that over a given period of time, those countries reduced their recurrent expenditure to match non-oil revenue. Now, I handled that calculation so I can talk about it confidently. And what I found at the time was that we were doing recurrent expenditure of about 150% of our non-oil revenue. Oh. So what the committee now adopted and recommended was that, look, over a period of 5 years, let Nigeria target reducing recurrent expenditure relative to non-oil revenue to 100%, which if you do, then the whole of your oil revenue can be freed for development, in which case infrastructure and then saving, which relates to this sovereign national wealth fund.
You just listened to Dr. Adedipe. He's an economist, and he was also a member of the Expenditure Review Committee that was set up in October 2010 and lasted through March 2011. Now, there were the review was constituted by the federal government with a view to bringing down the cost of running government. But according to Mr. Adedipe, the recommendations of that committee was not implemented, and we did hear him give us some of the recommendations of that committee. Well, Gabriel is here to give us his own perspective and to react to that comment of Dr. Adedipe. You just listened to him. What are your thoughts? So he did come up with, well, he talked about how matching our recurrent expenditure to match non-oil revenue. He talked about the difference, 150%, and he did say that if we could do that, that would bring down or free up more money rather from the recurrent expenditure.
Well, it's very easy to do if you have the political will. For example, you can choose to have 50 ministers. You can choose to have 25 ministers. You can choose to have 7 ministers. You can choose to have one parastatal for the entire transport industry. A country like America has a Department of Transport that looks after aviation, marine, road, and everything. But we have ministries for aviation, for transport, for the, whatever. So it's down to the political will. It is down to leadership. It's down to a leadership that says, yes, we have done it like this before, but we cannot continue. And if we're running a government with 50 ministers, the Constitution says every state you have a minister, so the upper limit is 36, and I'm not going to go beyond 36. If we have 200 special advisors and assistants, we are going to scrap all of that. The Constitution does not require me to have those people. If we have for every ministry 10, 15 parastatals, we are going to scrap most of those. And the committee that was asked to review the government agencies identified over 400 federal government agencies, parastatals. A lot
400
of
active.
Both active, inactive. Well, active in the sense that you are spending money, they are in the budget, okay. So they are active. And a lot of them doing what other agencies are doing. If you go to each ministry, you can easily see the duplications. Each one being created at some point because some people felt you should create another committee, another commission, another authority, another agency. So it is down to political will. of the leadership to say, you don't even have to look at your total non-oil revenue.
I was just going to come to that theory that what he said were the recommendations.
That is a benchmark you can use because most of it is sustainable. Your non-oil revenue is sustainable because it comes from agriculture and others. But even that does not have to be all spent. Some of that you should save for capital, for infrastructure. So you need to have a leadership that says, we've got to cut the government down to its bones. Do we need, on a case-by-case basis, at a question of absolute need, do we need this ministry? Do we need this government agency? Okay. And cut them down. Okay,
now let me comment here. The finance minister did say a couple of days ago, while we were on the strike action, she did say that government has already embarked on measures to scrap some government agencies and merge some others. She also talked about the fact that ghost workers will be fished out, ghost pensioners using the biometric system. But as I was talking to my guest yesterday, I brought up that same issue of the biometric system, which is meant to capture or at least reveal who these ghost workers or ghost pensioners are. And he did say that it's nothing new, and that this biometric system is actually, or at least as of last year, was already in existence and being used, and that it hasn't been as effective as the minister is saying that it will be. And also, that on one hand, another issue is the fact that yes, the government can bring down its size by merging some ministries or departments and scrapping others. But if the Constitution says that this is the number of ministers that you can have, you can or you should have, what isn't the hands of the president tied if he wants to employ the political will to bring down the size of his workforce, or at least his immediate cabinet? But if the Constitution does not empower him, there's nothing he can do. So perhaps we're going to have Constitution review itself.
No, that's why I said you don't even have to go that far to fight the Constitution. If the Constitution says 36 ministers, you stop at 36. Now we have far more than that. So you stop at 36, you reduce the layers and layers of special advisors, special assistants and agencies, and get the ministers to do some of that work. You don't need to have two ministers in one ministry. In that ministry you have perhaps 10, 15, 20 advisors. Each minister has his own advisor, his or her own advisors. The permanent secretaries have their own special assistants. Then at the presidency, you have layers and layers of advisors and assistants. All of that is not allowed in the Constitution. It's not provided for in the Constitution. They are purely political appointments. If you remove all of that and then look at the cost of maintaining a minister, what does it cost to maintain a minister in Nigeria? What does it cost to maintain a minister in countries that are comparable to us? If you take out all of that, you don't need to worry about the Constitution. You don't even need to go there. You can save easily 40-50% of what it takes to run those ministries now without even going near the Constitution. So that's within the power of the president. He can decide today that each minister should have only one assistant. He can decide that he doesn't need two, 3, 4 assistants for every minister. He can decide in the presidency that we don't need all these large numbers. And at the National Assembly, the Senate president has about 10 advisors and assistants. The speaker has another 10 or so.
So the people who are advising the president are different from the people who are obviously advising the vice president?
Absolutely. The vice president has his own team of advisors and assistants. The president has his own. Some of those advisors have their own advisors as well. So if you see the bureaucracy, it's amazing how many people are hired there just to advise an advisor, and it just keeps going on and on.
Or to assist an assistant. Okay, now in reaction to this calls by several labor civil rights organizations and even the general populace to reduce the size of government, President Jonathan, in one of his recent speeches, came out and announced that there will be a 25% cut to basic salaries of the executive. Do you think that's enough, or it should go deeper than that?
That's not enough. That's not.
How much can we save? Is it going to be a significant number? What we will save from the basic salary? Because the argument is it's not actually the salary that that's the issue. It's the allowances that come after this basic salary.
That's not addressing the issue at all. You need to address the total costs of maintaining a minister. His salary, his vehicles, his maintenance, his travels, local and international travel. You get the total cost of of maintaining a minister, and you take 50% out of that first.
Not the basic.
No, basic is
or a combination of both the basic and the allowance, everything.
Not just what the minister earns. Okay. If he has 10 special advisors, and each of those special advisors have secretaries and admin officers and drivers and mechanics and people looking after them, the total costs of maintaining a minister, the government has it in its budget. You can start with taking out 50% from that, and you can still run this government effectively, because a lot of that expense is just not for any real work being done. They are created because they want to be created. They are not created because there is substantial work being done. If you interact with government, there are special advisors that don't advise anybody, but they are there. And all they do is go to the airport, and the minister is going, they go and pick them from the airport, they come back to the office, and all that kind of thing. So you first of all, you get the total cost of keeping a minister, the total cost of keeping every advisor in the presidency, the number of advisors they have, and then get a total cost. Start with 50%, because a lot of those expenses are actually overblown. There's constant traveling within and outside the country that does not add any value to what the government is doing.
Let's linking all of this to the 2012 budget, which is still a proposal, and it hasn't been passed yet. So how does all of this impact or affect the 2012 budget? Will we have to take it apart again?
You have to take it apart, but again, you need a National Assembly that has the self-discipline, that has to start by healing itself. The physician in the assembly has to heal itself. The National Assembly has to come down drastically, invite very large amounts on their own cost.
How can we trust the political will of those members who? I mean, if you're in a situation where you're going to pass some law that's going to affect your allowances or your salaries, how can we trust that? As a nation, we can trust that our lawmakers or policymakers will have that discipline to bring down.
Well, it's like what has happened with the subsidy removal. You don't trust the National Assembly to do that. You force them to do it. In several countries, recently in Singapore, the civil society, the labor union forced the president to reduce his salary. So if you can go on strike because the price of petrol has gone up and it's affecting your pocket, it's even more important to go on strike when you find that a National Assembly person is earning 40, 50 million a month for doing what? It's better to go on strike for that purpose than to go on strike because petrol has gone up by
Okay, then looking at basically going forward now, how do you see all of this playing out? First, when the first quarter of this year, the 2011 budget will expire in March. By April, we should be running the 2012 budget. What scenario are we going to see from there? We're going to have a new budget. What kind of differences or what changes are we going to be expecting?
If we go by what we have now, there will be significant changes. The removal of the subsidy is now 50% of what was expected. So the budget will be amended by that. Beyond that, you will not get much changes. Clearly, there is no political will now on the part of the National Assembly or the presidency to make the kind of large, big cuts that we are talking about. They have to be forced by pressure